Oh, okay.
I think we're on.
Okay. Good afternoon. The Design Review Board 2 public meeting of June 19th, 2008 is called to order. Please refrain from talking among yourselves during the meeting, and please turn off or put on vibrate all cell phones and pagers. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting room. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, is asked to completely fill out one of the speaker's cards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. You will be called to present a case or speak on any specific item as desired. Anyone who wishes to be re-noticed about a project must completely fill out one of the postcards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff to receive notice of subsequent meetings. Current DRB agendas are available by calling our DRB hotline at 818-548-3171 or by visiting our website at www.ci.glendale.ca.us. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and DRB reconsideration and appeals is available at the table by the front door. Please note that appeals must be filed within either 7 or 15 calendar days of the DRB decision date, depending on the application. The case planner will announce the length of the appeal period with each case. The chairperson may reorder agenda items at her discretion. Can we have the roll call, please?
Sure. Mr. Carter?
Here.
Ms. Friedman?
Here.
Mr. Garagos?
Here.
Mr. Zarifian?
Here.
Mr. Malikian?
Before we have the report regarding the posting of the agenda, can I please have a motion in terms of a temporary chair for tonight's meeting?
Make a motion to have Ms. Friedman act as temporary chair.
Second.
What a surprise and an honor. Thank you. Can we have a vote, please?
Sure. Roll call. Mr. Garagos?
Yes.
Mr. Zarifian?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Friedman?
Yes. Can we please have the report regarding the posting of the agenda?
The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside of City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on June 12th, 2008.
Thank you. I have no cards for oral communications, so we will go right to our first project, please. The first project on the agenda is 2-PDR-2008-005A, 3870 Karen Lynn Drive.
Yes. Madam Chair, members of the board. The project before you here on Karen Lynn Drive will be just right here in this one panel area. Very briefly, this is an existing site plan. This is a proposed site plan. Here's the proposed floor plan, the existing roof. This is the proposed elevations. We have a color material board. There's a perspective up here. Photographs here. Sorry. Then I'll go through and do the presentation as we go through. This is a first-time submittal for this project. It was previously approved in May of 2005 by this board, but it was a permit was never acquired, and so the applicant's approval expired, and so they're coming back, and this is the first time the board has seen it again. The project is located in the R1R zone. It's a relatively flat lot, a little tiny slope at the street level. It's about 20,000 square feet. The house was constructed in 1968. The only environmental constraint is noted in the staff report that I wanted to highlight. There are oak trees. The one in the front of the house, oak and sycamore trees, the one in front of the house was reviewed by the urban forester, and they've provided some mitigation measures and felt that the removal of a large pine tree would actually help the growth of the oak and sycamore. Going through the rest of the staff report, if we look at this neighborhood, it's in the Chevy Chase neighborhood. This particular Chevy Chase neighborhood is characterized by ranch-style homes. When we compare homes in the neighborhood, I'll just kind of highlight items and note there was an error on my part. For some reason, I wrote that the subject proposal was going to be a two-story, and it's not. It's a one-story house, which is obvious from the elevations there. Most of the homes in the neighborhood are one-story, similar to this one. The floor area ratio for most of the homes in the neighborhood is the same as this, about 15%. And as I mentioned, the lot size in this particular case is larger than most homes in the neighborhood. The setback is a little closer to the street, but on the curve here, this home kind of is hidden by trees, and it's a relatively large lot at 20,000 square feet, so the other homes are a bit out of the way, so it's really hard to make a comparison because it is a fairly wide lot at the street. Now, just very briefly, kind of run through these, but I'll be glad to go back and look at each of these in more detail. When we look at the three categories, broad categories of site planning, mass and scale, and design, what I'd like to do is just sort of hit some summary points, and then I'll be glad to go back through them. When we look at the first point for the site planning, the staff felt that the lot coverage, the landscaping, the garage access, and parking appear compatible with the existing homes in the neighborhood, and we felt it was consistent with the intent of the guidelines. The mass and scale, we felt in summary that the house's overall roof height and pitch appear consistent with the ranch-style neighborhood and guidelines. The only issues staff had some concerns about were the enhanced entry and the roof. Just didn't seem to fit that particular style. Let's see, under the design category, the overall proposed architectural style and texture and quality materials appears compatible with the guidelines in the ranch-style homes in the neighborhood. With an exception, we did note again the enhanced entry area, that roofed area, the white vinyl windows and the cultured stone veneer wainscot, and we had some comments down below under our recommendations. We would like to also note that we did meet with the applicant and the owner, at least one of the owners, the wife of the family here, and discussed several of these issues, and we've worked with the architect several times during this review period, and he's been very cooperative. So under the recommendation, the overall modest addition appears to be consistent with the site planning and mass and scale. However, the architectural treatment at the entry and material choices are not entirely consistent with the ranch style and surrounding neighborhood, and we're making these three recommendations: that the entryway's architectural style and volume needs to be modified and integrated with the overall ranch style design. We recommend the use of aluminum-clad casement window materials rather than the vinyl window material, and we recommend using a brick wainscot rather than a cultured stone veneer. Should the board approve the project, then we have cited some of the site planning, mass and scale, and design, sort of the recommendations that we have here. But anyway, that pretty much concludes my comments. I can go back in more detail if the board wishes, but this gives you a quick overview. The project's basically, we feel, is consistent with just the exception of those couple items that we mentioned.
Is this exactly the same submission that was approved the last time around?
Not exactly, very similar. But it's very similar. They brought the garage forward, so that's almost the same. There's a little extra addition that's been added here.
Did they do something different at the entry previously, or?
The entry was very similar to the existing style now. I actually brought the plan here just in case you were to ask to see what it looked like.
I'd be interested. Yeah, maybe you could put it up on the board.
It's very similar.
Similar to what they proposed?
Yes, that's...
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I thought you meant similar to what's there now.
No, similar to what was proposed, except the front entry. The front entry on this version is different. So,
While you do that, Armin Hagobian?
Good afternoon, members of DRB. My name is Armin Hagobian with Edward Hagobian Associates. Again, as staff has mentioned, we have worked with Chris Baxter, Stephanie Wright, staff members to develop this project, as we have also worked with the owner. I can't add any much more to what Chris has already advised you. We've Taking into consideration some of the design features of the existing house, as you can see, the entry has been lifted up a little bit to create maybe a little bit nicer entry visually as you come up, and create a window treatment on top to bring in a little bit more light into that entry. I think that was one of our concerns with that portion of the house, that it was a little bit dark on the inside. But again, all the setback issues, landscape issues, materials have been pretty consistent throughout the building itself. We try and keep the design of the house as consistent as possible. Much more that I can add at this point.
Do you have any thoughts about the staff recommendations?
Well, I like to, first of all, the window treatment that was mentioned to be vinyl, it's going to be clad. I've spoken with the owner, we're going to change it to clad. The entry of the roof, we can maybe tone it down a little bit and have a little bit more vehicle-oriented design versus a more pronounced, yes. I mean, we can work on that if you like, but if it's a condition, or if it's something that you guys like for us to work on, and
would they be open to doing sort of a hip extension as opposed to a gable? If it was raised also, the plate on that could be higher.
We can possibly do a hip, so it's not as visually prominent, but we felt that when you come up the driveway from the original design or the current house, you really don't see the entry, and right now it has open rafters, and it has destroyed the entryway, the landscaping, and it's just kind of one of the reasons why we did that is just to have an enclosed but lifted entry roof.
Could I just ask, there are only 3 recommendations, so the third one is the consideration of using brick wainscot rather than cultured stone veneer. Is that it? Would that be as a hardship? Is that in your ballpark? Is that something?
The owner has liked the stone itself.
Okay.
There is a house on St. Augustine that has similar treatment. It does have the stone and it does have a lifted front. We tried our best not to have it too prominent, but this particular one that was approved by, I'm not sure which board it was approved by, actually does face the street. This doesn't really face the street because it's kind of hidden away. It's got a lot of vegetation in it, but the reason why we did that is just to have a little bit more light coming through because we have a window on top. But, the roof can be accommodated for, but the owners are a little bit leaning towards the stone, I guess, because they just like that, the coloration and the features.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to close the public hearing, public session. Yes?
I would just...
Hang on one
sorry.
second.
Just to clarify, not to be argumentative with Mr. Hagobian, but I do believe the house in the neighborhood that has a similar treatment has not been signed off by staff because the current condition was actually not approved by DRB.
I was going to ask, actually, if you had a photo of that house, because when I drove past it, I noticed that house had a similar kind of vibe as what they're proposing, and I was hoping you would have a photo of that so that the board could see it. Did you guys notice that house?
Yeah.
All right, so maybe we don't need that. Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, so whoever would like to go first?
I just had a comment on the entry. I think it might be nice if it was a hipped dormer as opposed to a gable. I think that would help. It could still be lifted, a higher plate, possibly. I think that might help it integrate it. So it could still have a lift and have the same kind of light entry into the entry, but it might be more consistent.
Yeah,
Any other?
I imagine the same.
Yeah.
I think it will be
I
more
think it would help.
consistent with the rest of the neighborhood and the house probably itself.
So just to clarify for us and for our audience, if that was the intention of that board, that would be a recommendation to consider or a recommendation that would, for approval? I mean,
Well, I was going to see how the board felt. See how strongly.
As I mentioned, there are only 3 recommendations, and the applicant has said they're on board with changing the vinyl window material to aluminum clad, so that's one. I did hear that correctly. The other recommendation is to consider using the brick material wainscot, and so the real linchpin here probably is the entryway. So it's how compelling we feel about that. Now, I've stated it, haven't offered much opinion yet.
How's some of you feel? I think it really helps.
Any other comments?
Yeah, just with regard to the use of brick instead of stone, I think as I was driving around the neighborhood, I felt that this was one of the more consistent sort of neighborhoods that I've seen in terms of use of brick. So somehow using brick will put it together with the rest of the neighborhood, I think, unless there's that stone treatment, like the way, actually, I think this one probably, is it almost the same as the house that we just talked about on St. Augustine? It's the same treatment, basically. That house looked a little bit different than the rest of the neighborhood. I don't know how you felt, but it seemed like all of a sudden this house was playing a different note on within the whole composition of the street. So I felt that unless you really don't want to use brick for some reason, I don't know, you can comment on it if you want.
I think it's interesting to know that house hasn't been signed off on, that's around the corner, because when I was driving up there, this is, I guess, a tract that was put in all in probably the 1960s, and there's maybe 5 variations on the model, It's one of those tract houses, but it's a really nicely done one, and it really has a character, and it really has a consistent feeling. And when I was driving up there and I passed that house, I felt like, whoa, somebody just dropped a tract house from, I don't even know where, somewhere out in the desert, in the middle of this really nice neighborhood. And I felt like that design of that house really was not compatible with what was around it. I mean, it really is jarring. And not only is that house jarring, but there's something very cheap feeling about the way the veneer looks and the windows. It really, you have this neighborhood where clearly they had spent a lot of time detailing it and putting in nice details, and I mean, it's really nicely done. And then that house just looks worse. It looks like a house that's $100,000 less than the rest. So I'm a little mystified why someone would want to do the same thing to their house. I just think that in general, that this kind of stone cladding at this point, it usually looks really cheesy. It has to be done kind of in the right place at the right time, but it's very commercial in a way, and I think it's a downgrading of this house, and it's very hard for me to want to support it. I think adding the square footage, no problem. I think they've got plenty of room there, and they've done a nice job with the massing and all of that. But the detailing, to me, is just, it's a downgrade for the house,
Yeah.
and I can't support it. I think the submittal they came in last time where they kept the arches, and I think some of I don't know, it looks like they have no kind of veneer there, but to me that looks a lot more in keeping with the rest of the neighborhood. But in terms of the submittal that's here, I think it's a downgrade of the house. I in all good conscience can't but vote for it.
Yeah, it doesn't look that it connects itself first to the neighborhood, second to the house itself, as Ms. Friedman said.
It's interesting. It's 2 weeks ago we had another project with a brick veneer and stuff. And when I went to the drive-by and the sighting of that, and when you look at them in singular, you say, well, brick, or they want. So it's only when you drive away and then you drive past 6, 8 other houses that have a brick veneer where you see a consistent style in that you say, oh, now I see what that stone would look like in the absence of the brick. Now, in that project, they decided to just go stucco, which we supported, but we're looking at a recommendation that says consider using brick, and I think we probably have a consensus here that that's probably an important consideration. So.
Well, I'm not sure that. I hate to do it because it's I don't want to stand in the way of them moving forward, and it's not like they're doing a huge addition. I don't think this is going to, really impact negatively on, people's lives around it. But at the same time, I'm not real comfortable with it, and I think it's kind of the wrong direction to go. And I feel strongly enough that I think that I personally would like to see it again, because, they could change the brick, they could change the windows, they could bring the roof down. I'm just not quite sure what the goal is here. I mean, if we give that kind of comment, it's like, well, then what are they doing? I'd like to see this house as kind of a gestalt, and you start changing those little details, and a lot starts to kind of change. So, I mean, we have the option, of course, and I'm curious to see what the board thinks of passing it with the staff recommendations, or we could ask for it to be redesigned and to see it. And I feel like the changes are such a huge amount of changes in a way. I mean, we're asking them to change the entire sort of style of the house that we may want to see it again, as opposed to...
I don't know if that's necessary.
But, that's why I'd like to see what you guys think. If you're comfortable passing it with the staff...
If you're actually saying change it to brick, I think that's a fairly straightforward change out of material. And I think if you guys thought that the hip was enough on the entry, I think that's a fairly...
Okay.
Something that could be done.
If you guys are comfortable with that, that's
Yeah.
fine. Then why doesn't someone make a motion, and we'll see where it goes.
I would move approval of case 2 PDR 2008-005 Apple with the recommendations as revised. Does it need a revision?
Well, yeah, you would need to make it a condition rather than a recommendation.
Well, that's easy enough if I can recommend this. Scratch the word consider, capitalize the word use, W, I mean the U for use, and just say, use a brick material wainscot, if that's the intent of the board.
And then what about the, what about the entryway?
Well, I could add on to that first sentence up there, the board recommends a hip roof.
With it, if he wants to elevate the...
When you say elevate, can I just ask this question for clarification? May I approach the board here? Just so that when the applicant comes to staff, and with my magic pointer, oh, here it is.
The plate line of that gable is higher than the plate line of the house.
Yes. Now, that's what I was going to ask is, for instance, when we look at the plate line, is the plate line level okay with the board?
Yeah, I think
What about this?
elevating it, I think, is nice.
So this elevation point, he can maintain that, and then just create a gable off of that. A hip off of that, because it is a gable.
Yeah, I think elevating it's nice.
So maintaining that elevation there's fine, but just make it a hip.
Yeah.
Is that how you all understand it?
If that's what the board likes. I mean, I personally think that our original submittal is nicer, but I'm, fine with me.
I think they want to embellish the entry. I think that's nice. I don't know about that.
dark.
It's fine with me. Okay.
I'd like this to go up and...
Okay, so that he can maintain this height, this gable height, and then just create a hip roof, and the staff would look at it with the staff architect and...
And I believe the applicant would like to make a statement if the chair is willing to reopen.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, staff. I think that the roof is fine. We can work on the roof. And just conversing silently with the client, if we were to remove the stonework and keep it in its original style, which is stucco coming down, would that be okay with the staff also, with board members?
Well,
You can make that as an option.
We can make that, leave that to you
As an option? Okay, that's great. Thank you.
So my motion will stand with those conditions as enumerated.
Well, with the option of...
Yes.
And then the other one, and the other stucco being an option.
Yes, and what I've added there is I say use a brick material wainscot or stucco rather than a cultured stone veneer material.
Yeah, and, we can leave it up to them if they want to use brick, anywhere, it's fine. They don't need to come back or anything, use it or not use it.
And would the board like for me to read the draft record of decision into the record, or would you...
I think we can just
just adopt that as a regular
Adopt it.
decision. And we will modify that to reflect, as conditioned, the proposed house, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, I think we need a second.
Second.
Oh, yes,
I'll
I'm sorry.
second that.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
who's
you're
second?
Sorry, no. I stepped on it.
May I ask who's seconding? Are you seconding? Okay, so Mr. Zarifian? Okay, so we have a motion to approve final design with these amended conditions. And Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Gerges?
Yes.
Mr. Zarifian?
Yes.
Ms. Friedman?
Yes.
And that is a final design approved with conditions 4-0.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Our next and last case is 2-PDR-2007-087-C at 432 Myrtle Street.
Hi, yes, before Chris starts his presentation, I'd like to interject. The board last heard this case last year on December 7th, and while we realize that much of the board as currently composed was not around on that date, and that the return for redesign is a de novo hearing, I'd like you to really focus on the board's previous comments, the 13 or 14 or so comments. That was
What would be
previously.
helpful, I think, as you go through it, is maybe to present the case and then go through those comments. I'm sure you were going to. That way we can see how they were addressed.
Absolutely. We'll do that. Very quickly, let me do this. Again, this project being at 432 Myrtle Street, what I'd like to do is give you just a quick overview, and then I'll seat myself and go through it. I have the older plans on these two panels right here, two sheets of plans. Here are the new plans here. I have a perspective, color board, location map, and here's some additional photos. Here, I'll get these for you. Okay. The project was last reviewed by the board on December 7th and was voted 4-0 to return for redesign. And the applicant is proposing to demolish an existing single-family house, which is at the front of the lot, and a garage at the rear, and construct a new 4-unit, 2-story townhouse apartment building with 11 semi-subterranean parking spaces. And of course, they come in off of Myrtle Drive because this is a relatively narrow lot, the traditional 50-foot wide lot. It's not on a corner, it's in the middle of the block, as you can see in the location map above. The house and garage were constructed in 1921. I had a little bit more description here for the property, but I think you all can look through that. It's located in our 1650 zone, which is our medium-density residential zone, actually medium-high residential zone. The only environmental constraint that I wanted to point out or highlight would be the potential historic nature of the older home, which, when I spoke with the historic preservation planner, he said it would not have a significant cumulative impact on craftsman homes in the city. And he went on to describe that this would not be an issue, so you can see that for more detail in the staff report. The property is surrounded by multifamily buildings. I'll put some detail on that. As the board members are probably familiar, there are no guidelines for multifamily at this time. There are just some basic concepts that we try to follow, and so we're going through those here in the staff report. When we look at our site planning, mass and scale, and architectural style and materials, we did kind of review that and comment on those down here in our staff recommendations. And I'll get to those when I finish, but since we have a long list of conditions and comments from the board from the previous time, I'd like to go through those, and then we can kind of battle our way through that if you don't mind. Okay, the first comment was address all the conditions from the previous DRB meeting held on August 23rd, 2007. And then what I've done in your staff reports, I have a note here to see the applicant's separate responses attached and staff comments to all 13 conditions listed below. So there were 13 conditions from the last time prior to the December meeting. The August meeting, there's 13 conditions. So the first one, maybe I'll just go back up here. First one was to restudy the rear elevation, which is right here. This is the old version right here. It says, restudy the rear fenestration and correct the section drawing to accurately reflect the elevation drawings. First, the easiest part, the two lower windows here were removed. As far as reviewing the section drawings, I sat down with the applicant. We actually sort of went through it, point by point. We really didn't know where there was a discrepancy. Now, what you'll see, though, is a change here in the section plan, which is good, which we'll get into later on some of the conditions, is that one of the comments the board had that will be coming up is consider lowering this deck, and so that the landscape area is right on the deck level. So that has been done, but I'll go into more detail on that.
And why were the windows removed?
Next comment. That's why. Restudy the rear common area and consider eliminating the two rear windows. There you go, ma'am. I'm sorry. So that's why those were removed, and the deck had been lowered. So I jumped ahead of myself. I apologize. Number 3, consider stepping down the rear deck, enabling a level walkway, which I pointed out that's what the applicant has done. You can see it in the section view plan here. The next one, add additional additional planting trees along both sides of the property. This is on the east and west side. So this property faces north. Here, the front area, here's our north elevation. The east and west sides, the board had wanted more trees, but when you look at the landscape plan and some of the planting areas, the way the board had, the applicant wrote it up was, really isn't any more room to put it. It's basically the same number of trees and all. It's just, there's really no change. Because he said, to meet the walkway requirements and widths, you're pretty much limited on the number of planting that you can do.
By code, do they have to have a walkway on both sides of the building? And why couldn't the...
By zoning code, no, but for building and safety and fire exiting, there are requirements.
But couldn't that be part of those people's patio instead of being paved
Could
on the
very well
north
be.
side?
It could be. I didn't check into that. The applicant may be able to address that.
Okay.
I have seen that before, but it
Seems
needs
like
to
a
be...
tremendous waste of space.
Yeah,
It's considered a 3-story building, it might need 2 exits.
is it a 3-story by building code?
It might be, and then
I know in zoning code it's only considered 2-story.
But couldn't the exit be just, like something...
We can ask the
low
applicant,
plant?
probably knows for sure, but I think that might be a reason.
All right, then maintain the existing mature trees if possible, if not replaced with new trees. Well, a review of the plans, and we actually went out to the site and looked, and we didn't see any trees on the site. I think some of the issue is that there are trees right next door to the site, and it should be in the photographs where you'll see some of these trees. And so they're proposing to put in 10 trees. They had 11. So they are 1 tree down from the last submittal. I believe right here is where they had 4, and they have 3. But part of that reason is they reconfigured and dropped that deck area, and in doing so, they took out the elevator in this area here, and then they had to relocate the stairs here. And in doing that, they reduced that planter. So that's the new trees, but there isn't. We didn't see any mature trees on the site. Even a tree in the parkway was just a little sapling that had been recently planted. The next one is provide a written agreement from the neighbor to the east to remove the existing palm tree on our property. And in your packet, you should see that they did submit a letter, and it was signed by a person who they say is the neighbor. Whereas on the next letter that the board asked for to provide a written agreement from the neighbor to the west to replant trees on their property, there is a letter, but it is not signed by the neighbor over on that side. So I have to let the applicant explain what's going on with that, but it wasn't signed. It was just a letter stating that it was okay to do. Now, they're not going to be removing the neighbor's trees, But because the trees are so close to the property line, by the time they excavate right next to the property line, trees, the roots will be compromised on that side.
So if, all right.
That becomes a private property problem between the two, because he would be compromising all the trees on that east property line. There's 2 or 3 of them through there. But that is
And do they have room on the other property to replant there?
that's pretty tight over there too. This is one of
There
the
may
older.
not be room.
If there is, it may be very small. The photographs we might be able to look and see, but it's very limited over there. Very limited. Most of these things are built up pretty tight. The next one is protect or replace existing street trees. Well, there is one if you look in the photographs, and the applicant has agreed to plant the additional trees that the urban forester requires it. Consider a wider profile for the vinyl windows. The applicant did submit this here. And then it says he's identified as a Marvin clad wood and clad glider to address this requirement.
And it's not the ones with the divided lights, right? It's the...
Yeah, it would have to match, it would be matching this.
Right, okay.
The staff gets this a lot at the counter where they'll say it's going to look like this, let's say frame or volume, but it's not going to have divided.
Just want to be sure.
Yeah, so we have to work through that with them. And we could, if you want to add that as a condition, that it shall not have divided light, if that's appropriate. Okay. The next is consider introducing a variety of materials in some areas of the building, i.e. wood, siding, etc. Applicant stated, as noted in your staff report, they looked it through and they felt that what they had on the previous submittal works for the new submittal. But they've maintained the same thing. That would be their argument. Consider introducing vertical gates to match railings. Actually, that was the same as last time. When I looked here, I was trying to figure out what was the difference, and it looks very similar or the same to me. Here's these here, but this is going down into the semi-subterranean in front, accessing it there, so I'm not quite sure what that is about. Verify that the landscaping count quantity symbol shown on the landscape plan is consistent with the legend, show all benches and other amenities. So I went through and counted it up. It looked like this was accurate. This would be the latest one. It looked accurate to me.
I'm just wondering whether the previous comment, maybe it was supposed to say vertical gates because the railings are vertical, are horizontal. Maybe it was meant to say horizontal because the railings are all horizontal.
Well, that's horizontal, but this isn't.
That's what I'm saying, but the way it's written, it says, consider introducing vertical gates to match railings. So if the note was about matching the railings, maybe that's just a typo, and it meant to say horizontal, because the railings are horizontal. That doesn't make sense otherwise.
No, I have to admit, not my case. So.
Okay.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're correct, Ms. Friedman.
So I think it's supposed to have said, I think it should have said horizontal.
Horizontal.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that.
Yes. Okay, very
that
good.
might be something we
All right.
can just ask them to do.
The last one of the 13 from the previous time was reduce the size of the gas meter doors. They're the same. Applicant said that once they get into, which are here and which are here, once they get in and if the gas company allows them to create a smaller volume, they'll make the door smaller, but it's going to be the same volume. So there's no change on that. Okay, so the second new condition, that's not a repeat of a previous one, or I should say really the first new one, is redesign the site plan and common area by making it more usable and accessible. Now, my understanding at the time, what the board was looking for was they had some concerns with it being tucked back here into the back area here, and that they wanted it more usable and accessible. I think there may have been even some comments about relocating it over here, center, and kind of breaking the whole volume up. So, and you can see what the applicant did, which the staff was actually relatively satisfied with, that is that they did make it a lower deck here. They dropped that deck down here. And so it is, you don't have to step up and down. So when you look here, you'll see there was stepping up, right through here and through here. They sort of had this lift area here. They relocated all that. They changed this stair design to create a little bit more volume over here. So that is something to consider. We just wanted to point that out. Also, the next condition, redesign the building to meet the new building code going into effect just January 2008, or this past January 2008. So that's, I have to assume that the applicant has met that. He can address that issue too. And then finally, the recommendations. The only thing the staff really was going to point out is that if the board elects to approve the project, we just had this one condition relating to the street tree. If the applicant is willing to plant those, he has stated in his information that he submitted to us that he'll be glad to plant that street tree. And then we have our design analysis description below, for instance, and I kind of jumped over that earlier in the staff report, but I'll just give a real highlight now. On the site planning, the proposal appears to exhibit locations for the dwelling unit and garage entries, balconies, fenestration patterns, and landscaping similar to the other multi-family buildings in the neighborhood. The mass and scale appear broken into identifiable units with different forms. Building's design benefits from a variety of articulated facades, roof forms, balcony locations, private patios, and recessed entries that break the building's massing similar to other buildings in the neighborhood. Finally, the architectural style and materials. The building's design appears to reflect contemporary architecture, and its exterior design includes articulated roof and wall designs, use of stucco and muted tone colors, muted color variations, fenestration design and patterns, and railings comparable to other multifamily buildings in the area. So that's a quick overview of the staff report. I'll be glad to go through with you more detail if you need. That concludes my comments at this.
Any questions for staff? Okay, Garo Nazarian, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Garo Nazarian with Domus Design. We tried to respond to all the comments of the previous meetings. The major issue for us, and as we discussed with Stephanie too, it was that common outdoor space. Previously it was raised on a planter box, no raised level. We changed our design and we dropped it down the same level of the deck. So walking around or going to for the common outdoor area, you don't need to step up and step down from the common outdoor area. And the other issue was to eliminate that 2 windows from the back of the building, and that comment was because of the location of the common outdoor. The board suggested not to have any opening window in the common area, because when other people uses that tenant, that unit, not to suffer because of that people in the common outdoor area. And regarding the trees, the 2 trees, we do have a signed letter from the neighbors that the palm tree is there, which they agreed. If it's necessary, we can remove the tree and replace them with that tree whenever they ask us in the front or what. But the other side tree that we don't have any signed letter, that tree, it has been removed already. There is no more tree on the inside tree. It has been removed already.
West side.
West side, yeah. And the board had a question regarding exiting?
The walkway on the east side, if that could be eliminated or not?
No, it is not, because each building should have 2 exits, legal exits.
So it has to be paved? It can't be even like grass or something like that?
That's an exit.
Even I would like to do that, grass with the stepping stone, but the fire department, they don't approve that stepping stone in that area, because it's an emergency exit. It should be
accessible,
in compliance with the code.
Yeah,
If you
consistent.
have any other question, I will be answering.
The louvers on the one side are what material?
Beg your
The
pardon?
louvers on the side, what is that made out of?
Hoovers?
It's metal, painted metal.
Is it painted metal, louvers on the side?
The railings?
No, the shades over the windows.
I just looked it up.
Does it say
says
metal?
I believe
didn't
it
see
says painted metal. It says,
I didn't see the note.
it's here, it's on this page.
Is it on that one?
It says painted metal louver.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, painted, well, it is important.
Any other questions?
Do you have a comment with regard to the railings, the doors and...
The railings, I don't mind if I have to go horizontal gates, horizontal bars, I will do it. I don't have any problem with that. Just for usually for the gates, we hesitate to go horizontal,
People
but if it's
use
the
it like
board
ladders.
insists to have a horizontal bars, we will put it horizontal, no problem.
All right, thank you very much. We'll let you know if we have any other questions. I'm going to close the public session. Now, I remember this project when it was here last, so I'll leave it up to you guys if you want me to give comments at the beginning or at the end.
Well, actually, let me get a comment and get out of here, because
Oh, you
I will
can-
turn to you. No, I don't mean literally get out of here. But my thoughts are globally, looking at this street and this project, this is a single-family house. It's now going to be 4 units. 67 square foot, 100 square foot lot, which if it was a single-family project, we'd be talking about what a small lot it is. Now it's going to be 4 dwellings. So I just say that, not to prejudice the applicant or their case, but when our citizens hear about downzoning, that the city planners are talking about downzoning, these are the thorny issues they're talking about. Because you look at the pictures on that street, and there are dozens of single-family little homes, some of them architecturally notable, some of them not. But they're all candidates for 4 more units. So I just invite people, this is just me extempore, but this question of downzoning is a thorny and very legitimate discussion for the city of Glendale. On this project, since you heard it before, and there's a pretty lengthy list of recommendations or considerations, my brain was flipping over a little there. Do we have a checklist? I almost should have asked staff, are there some conditions that were not met? Was anybody keeping score?
Well, I remember the discussion last time, and I can tell you my thoughts about it whenever you guys want.
So I'm totally finished. I just needed a scorecard.
But I think that, because there's 3 new people here in a way, my suggestion would be that you guys think of it in terms, really, I don't think you should get hung up on what was done, what it was like before. I think you need to just think about the project that's at hand now. I mean, that's what I would suggest, rather than trying to see what they meant and what they didn't meant. Just sort of, let's look at what's in front of us and talk about that. I mean, it's not even like it's that changed, to where it's not as though it's all that different, but it was returned for redesign last time, so it's very fair to look at it as a new submittal.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion. So, given that, who would like to, how would you like to proceed? I mean, I can give you, if you'd like, I can tell you my thoughts, and maybe that'll give you guys a minute to...
You're more warmed up, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll overall.
Okay, well, first of all, I've always thought that architecturally it was a really nice project, and I like the way that the massing of it, I like the detailing of it, the colors, the kind of, the style of it, I've always thought was very nice. So I compliment the architect in terms of that. My issue with it has always been, the issue that I had last time with it, I still have with it, which it's an issue that part of the reason that I think I'm having the issue is because of, that this keeps coming up, is because the city doesn't have multifamily guidelines yet, which I think doesn't give a lot of guidance to applicants or to us in terms of what the city is looking for in these projects. So because of that, I just have to kind of go on and just bring up my own thoughts, and whether or not they're the thoughts of the city as a whole, I don't know, because we don't really have those kinds of guidelines. But what I think about is a little bit of what you were talking about, and trying to think about this being one of probably several projects that are going to come down the pike, and what happens if the whole block builds something like this. The density is not an issue to me. You can do 4 units, you should be able to do 4 units, and that's what this kind of area is all about, is increasing the density. I have no problem with that. But what does become more problematic to me is how the outside areas are dealt with. It's a beautiful building. I have no problem with any of the detailing. I think it's, that's all really nice. But I do worry about projects that don't leave room for landscaping between buildings, that don't provide meaningful outdoor space for people who live there, especially given that probably as we go down the pike, we're going to have more and more of these. So where do the kids end up playing? I was never in favor of removing the windows in the back of the building. Personally, and I argued this then, I was sort of outvoted, but I personally find that to be a safety hazard. I think that if you're going to have an outdoor space, you really want windows where someone there, if you cry out for help for whatever reason, there's someone there who has a chance of hearing you, and that, I think that areas that are overseen by units are generally safer than ones that are just completely enclosed. So I find it sort of a safety issue. And, if somebody doesn't want to deal with noise from an outdoor area, they don't have to take that unit. They can take a different unit. Personally, I would like to be in a unit like that where you have the extra view and a little bit more landscaping. I think that would be a big plus for someone who wants to move into that unit. But in general, I've been consistent on the years I've been on this board that I just think that outdoor areas that are behind a building like that are not very functional. I think people who are in the first couple units are not going to want to walk all the way down this long building to get there. And what I've seen, I've been in apartment buildings like this, and what ends up happening is that rear unit ends up taking over that space, really, and it's not used by everyone else. And so then what you're left with are these very small outdoor areas. So if you have a couple kids, where can they play? Really, they're going to end up on the street in the front. And that's why when I had made the comment in the last time about reconsidering the site planning, what I was hoping to see was a much more kind of creative solution here, that would either involve a lot more articulation to create private open spaces, or breaking the building up somehow, creating something in the middle. I don't know what it is. There's a lot of different solutions. It requires a lot of thought, but not just to have a one long building. To me, that's sort of the easy answer. And if this building had a lot more space around it, where you could have larger patios, fine, no problem. Have your, long building. But given the narrowness of this lot, I just think I would have liked to see more consideration given to creating real outdoor spaces, because if this neighborhood keeps going this way, that's all these people are going to have. And, we don't have parks around here. There's no place you can walk to go to a park. And it's unfortunate that the developers have that burden, but because the city hasn't created a lot of parks and they don't have the space to, maybe, or the money to, or whatever, it could have becomes a little bit shifted on I think, the people who are developing these properties to create that space. Otherwise, where are the kids going to play? Where are people going to go? I know it's sort of not fair to dump it on you, but in a way you kind of have to, because there's no alternative for your tenants. So that's what I'm grappling with. Beautiful building, definitely an upgrade for the neighborhood. I have no comments at all on the building. Horizontal, vertical, whatever. That's up to the rest of you. But I have a little concern with the landscaping. One other thing, and beginning of the meeting, there was something I was trying to remember to say to staff during staff comments, and I couldn't think of what it was, and now I remember what it was, which was, I would like, because we don't have a landscape architect on either board at this point, I think it's really important that with multifamily and Hillside, that one of the landscape architects on staff, whether it's in the Parks and Rec department, I don't think planning has one, but maybe Parks and Rec does, reviews all these plans. Because a concern of mine, and I don't know because none of us here are landscape architects, but when you have this much underground stuff going on, when you're close to retaining walls, close to garages, will the plants live? And I think we really need a landscape architect to look at that and see whether these shade trees can really survive in these spaces, whether the plants can survive. So I think that's, in general, with all of these multifamily and with all of our hillside, I think we need to, my request is that staff has a process to just run those, even before they come to us, past this, a landscape architect.
Well, we'll definitely take that under consideration, but just for your information, just this week, planning staff a number of planning staff has undergone several hours of landscape training by a landscape designer, just to be more informed when we look at landscape designs.
Okay, well, that's helpful. But still, I think landscape architects go to school for a long time, and
Yeah, that's a point well taken. Thank you.
okay, so those are my comments.
Yeah, I can add a couple of things. One is that I also believe that when we design a new building, we should try to see if there are new ways to look at creating a unit that has better amenities to offer, rather than if you don't look at the elevations and look at the plans, it just becomes another one of the many residential units that have been created all over the city, and they lack space. And what happens is that people and children end up being in the streets playing in front of the buildings, which kind of creates a hazard for them. So I think there are ways to really improve that, but at the same time, when I'm looking at the comments, that should have been a very strong comment and a requirement spelled out in a way. I think it's upon us to do that.
I think it was number 2. You have to understand, this was a long conversation, too,
Yeah.
where we talked about the site planning, and I think that actually that Alan Malekian said what you said, which was kind of, if I look just at the footprint of the building, that really needs to be rethought, and we try to leave it open so that they would, we didn't want to give real specific guidance, but that's what that whole comment was about, which is why it's separate from everything else.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's a real issue, and we're going to see basically a lot of apartment buildings being generated in future in the very same manner, which lacks space, and that's basically what's needed for the residents feeling like they can step out and not be in the public realm, kind of. So I don't know, it's a very tough thing now. I know that this is the second time around, but for us, it's partially upon us to really make it clear in terms of this time that's be spent in a direction that will allow the designer to really follow some sort of a direction that is very different from what was presented. Because I was taking a lot of time looking at the 2 plans, trying to see what's different. And I even asked my colleague, I said, I can't see the difference, and I think that it would be nice to be able to really help applicants to follow a different direction in a very strong way. So I don't know what the answer is now. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I do think it puts us in a tough position, because I think if it was worded stronger about that, I'm just saying, it's hard, second time around and stuff. I know you must have talked about it, as you said.
We talked about it ad nauseum. To me, I think that the reason that we just had it as one sentence is because I think we were trying to make it clear, just what it says, where it says, redesign the site plan. You can't get any more specific than to say redesign the site plan, and, that was meant, and at the time when we discussed it, as a big kind of like redesign the site plan. I think we even said something like you may want to hire a landscape architect to do the site planning.
I almost think that it should become, as you said, the guidelines are lacking. So it's something. This is something that has to come up in that level.
Yeah, because I think
it's not project specific; it's city specific.
So a point of clarification from staff: R 1650 there's no minimum requirement for landscaping or square footage in that zone?
Madam Chair, members of the board, there is.
There is?
And the applicant is technically meeting.
And so just tell me, on a 6,700 square foot lot,
25%.
25%.
But it does,
Landscape.
what it doesn't spell out, what we've always asked for, is it doesn't really give much guidance as to how that landscaping is used,
Or if it's usable at all.
if it's usable at all.
Yeah.
And other cities, I mean, there are, Stephanie, yeah.
Yeah, if I may, while I agree that multifamily design guidelines adopted would give our applicants significant guidance that they may not have now. However, staff has heard this comment from not only this board, but the other board over and over again, and we are very clear with all of our applicants, even in just duplexes. We had several meetings with this particular application, and that particular comment did not go unnoticed.
If you, just to answer your question,
Yeah.
if you look at the first page,
Yeah,
under the project data, that'll give you requireds and provideds,
certainly.
if you look at the calculations.
And I think that one of the reasons that we're here is because in a way
25.
we transcend, if it was just about code, there wouldn't be any need for a board like this.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're here for.
Well, I think the problem is, if you're going to allow 4 units on a lot like this, and you look at how the setbacks are, I mean, unless you do something like a zero lot line on one side with more side on the side, you're almost forcing a person to put it in the rear yard, because it's the only way you can capitalize on the rear yard setback. So,
That's right, that was, I
where else are you
forgot to
gonna put it?
mention that, because, if the
I mean, if you try to
setback
put it in
doesn't
the
allow you,
center-
basically, then your unit has to become, have to become.
I mean, you can look at the site plan. If you tried to put that common area between it and make it 2 duplexes, where are you putting the rest of it?
Does it have to
so-
be so big? I mean, could the units be smaller? Could it be 3 units? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what their program.
Well, these are 1,300. I mean, that's not
Yeah.
it's not a large size unit.
If I may, it's not really an issue for the board to try to resolve, but just make your intentions known.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it just, in regard to you see the list of recommendations, I was counting the number of them that use the word tree. So it tells me that when you saw it last time, you were reaching, that landscaping and outdoor areas, you seem to be a little fixated on that. So I think we've come around to that again. So,
And I think a lot of good improvements have been made. I mean, but again, that the same issue kind of comes back, and it's hard to address. It seems like the applicant has a.
Okay, I'll reopen the public meeting.
Thank you. Just I want to bring to your attention, as you mentioned, we comply with all the zoning requirements, which all the units, they will build with the zoning ordinance. 25%, which is 1/4 of the lot, it's landscaped. And I think looking to just the landscaping of this site too, it's a nice landscaped area. And looking to the site plan again, you will see that the landscaping is spread in the 4 sides of the building. It is not that I have a landscaping one side, the other side I don't have it. I have planters all around of the building.
Yeah.
And by adding more tree, if it's a room, I will add another 10 trees if there is a room. And I think that it's the right of each landlord to build what is allowed by the zoning ordinance. And, these lots, these properties, it has been purchased about year and a half ago, which was top value. Now the economy is dropping, the prices down. And as you mentioned, it's not a huge units. It's 12, 13, 1,400 square feet units. That is the minimum that today the lifestyle of the families is required. And I understood very clearly the comment about the open space, design of the open space in the middle of the property by separating the buildings. I understand I understood clearly. even if not strong words, but it was very clear, and we discussed that issue. But it becomes the practicality, how you design that. A property like this, that you can build only 4 units, if I put the common area in the middle, I have to lose 1 unit. And the other thing that I met during all these years with my different clients, that open space location, common outdoor space location, it depends to the lifestyle of the families that they are living there too. There are a lot of families, they don't want to have a common outdoor space. Which family has no kids, the other family has 2 kids, the kids, they are playing in the common outdoor area. As isolated it is, it's desirable for some families, for some not. So that is the lifestyle of the families, how they want to use this common outdoor space. By this design, I see that I have a nice, large enough for this lot. 17 feet wide, common outdoor space, landscape, and with the amenities, benches or whatever I can put there, I give that quality of life on this project. And just to new members of this board, I want to bring your attention, this project, it was approved. But because we couldn't pull the permit on time, the design review board approval expired, I resubmitted for approval. And dropping down, depressing the common outdoor to make a level with the walk surface, that is a big effort because it is a costly. But because I understand and I would like to see even my project to have a nice usable spaces, so I convinced the owners, okay, spend this much more, but do that, it's nicer. So we did all our efforts to respond to the comments, and the comments that, it's a huge list of the comments, which is 14 items, few of them, it was a comment to make the gas meter doors smaller. I don't mind, even I can go with no door, but there is a minimum requirement with the gas company that should be this much to have access. Or the other comment was eliminate the back windows from the common outdoor. No, small comments which we try to answer to all of them. And I think that we answered 100% to all these comments. And really we are seeking the approval of this project to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'd say that it sort of does go back to a checkoff list. The applicant makes a point that it was approved with the notations, quite a few notations. So, yes, it was.
It was not approved by our board.
Okay.
No, it was not. By our board? Oh, so these were all, these were requirement?
No, previously.
December 16, 2004, case
Previously.
number 2-3295 went to this board, was approved at that time. Then 2 years later, their permits expired. Then they came back. They were given a new board number and back to this board again, but they may be new members.
Yeah, I don't know if any of the people that were on the board were the same people.
But in 2004, that's when it first was reviewed and approved, and then it expired. So we're talking 4 years ago. Since then, it's been this will be the 3rd time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at this time, it appears that at least one condition the applicant did not address, and that was what the board members asked them to address last time. So there's a comment on it. It's a legitimate issue. It's a major issue for you because you're at least addressing one of the comments that you had from the last time.
Well, does staff believe that we should take then the fact that it had previously been approved into our decision-making? I mean, is that a reason to then pass it?
Well, that is not really something staff can advise you on. There is a reason that the permit, when permits expire, the process has to be gone through, and for a variety of reasons, our codes do change, and the sense of the community changes. The sense of the board now may be substantially different than it was 4 years ago. I know our processes are certainly changing.
Well, let me kind of change my comments. I said it was previously approved, but this board, at least from a document of August 23rd, 2007, sent it for redesign with conditions. So I guess what I'm driving at is, I guess we got to get a pencil or a crayon here and sort of check off some of these conditions and see if enough of them have been met.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Baxter in the staff report really attempted to itemize.
To do that.
Itemize
If you read
that.
the second half
Yeah.
of the comment,
Yeah.
there's comment.
Staff is in a more challenging position, frankly, on the return for redesign, because we're simply doing that checklist. From what we heard from the board previously, what we're hearing from the board now is that the items are prioritized in a certain way, and they were prioritized even in the order that they were written. So perhaps just doing the numbers game does not do justice to the original intent of those conditions that were made because of the level of priority for some of those conditions. So that's the 2 cents from the peanut gallery.
I think it's an undue hardship for somebody when there's not guidelines to do a redesign. I think that's an undue hardship. I mean, there's a couple things I wish it had more of a street frontage, a street presence. I mean, there's little things I could make comments on it also. But I think without guidelines, I think it's an undue burden to say that unit, the common area goes in the center.
That's
So-
basically what I was getting to, but I have to say, one of the comments that the applicant made was that maybe to have a large common space that's private enough and it's towards the back of the building, it would be safer for the kids, or at least will be large enough for the kids to be able to do something, rather than breaking it up into pieces that the kids anyhow will end up in the street. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think in general, as the other board members said, there's nothing wrong with the design. It's just that the common spaces, the majority of it, that brings you to your unit. And from a single unit point of view, these kind of buildings kind of lack the outdoor space for each unit. There's something in the back of the overall building which can be used, which I think I'm just looking at both sides of the thing, but I think maybe having this large space that's flat before it was elevated and it's easy to reach with anyone, including the kids, maybe it's a good thing. I mean, you have to look at the bright side of the things. So in a way, you can look at it in 2 different ways, and it still works.
Yeah, I just think you're gonna have a rear yard setback, and if you don't make it a common area, it's gonna be what, you know?
Well, it can certainly be a common area. I just think, what do we want, what do 20 of these in a row look like? And to me, 20 of these in a row look like a place that I would not want to live, or have any kids live.
I completely agree, but there's no
It
guidelines.
could look like a street in London, actually, row housing.
Except that in London, they have parks on, every 2 blocks, and we don't.
Maybe we should then.
Well, and without guidelines, it's difficult. I mean, I think it's very
It's difficult, but that's why we're here, and the last time we did, I think, make it clear that this footprint wasn't working for us. I mean, I think that we gave a lot of comments about landscaping, and we had a lot of discussion about it, and I hate to say it, but I just don't feel that they really made enough of an effort to come up with some, if they had come in with some alternative site plans maybe, and even said, here's why this doesn't work, or here's what you end up with, at least I'd feel like there was some kind of...
Do they work with Stephanie, and, I mean, during this time, do they come back to you and and work
We
with
had
you?
several meetings where we reiterated the comments, and you're seeing the results.
Well, I'm not real clear. Is staff recommending approval of this as it is?
Staff struggled with whether or not to recommend approval on this because there were a substantial number of the smaller items that were addressed. We thought that it was important for the board to decide how important the issue of reconfiguring the open space was to you. We felt, not to dodge the question, but we did feel that it was a tough call for staff to make because it really has to do with what is the priority of the board, and then the staff will be able to take that information back, and all our viewers out in TV land will know that this is something that, while we don't have guidelines, it's something that's very important to the board and it's important to the community at this point.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I was going to add something here.
Yes.
I think one of the other reasons, if I may, and Stephanie will correct me on this, is if this was a first-time review with no history, I think staff would have much stronger comments on that issue, because we're pretty much aligned with what you're thinking, board's thinking. The problem with this project comes with a history. It comes with a history of a previous approval by a previous board, No.2, made up of different members, and then they come back with pretty much the same thing, and then they've made some modest changes to comply. And then the new comment comes in, all of a sudden, this sort of a complete redesign of the footprint. So for us, that's where it's a little difficult at this point, because historically we've had issue. We've tried to work with somebody who's had some type of a previous recognition by the board, and when they come back, not all the time, and there have been changes on different projects over the years, but this is an issue.
Well, let me ask you a question. If that's something we should take into account, why are we even hearing this? If you're telling me that because it was approved in the past, that we should then approve it if otherwise, it sounds like you're saying, well, if they hadn't been here before, staff would have a lot more reservations, but since they've been through the process, we feel like we should be easier, on it.
Well, that's
So then I'm wondering, why are we even seeing it if that's the case?
If I may, again, there is a reason that the entitlements run out and projects come back before the board. And if it was just a matter of checking the zoning regulations and approval, it would not have to come back for this discretionary review. As the project was under consideration and you were in dialogue, Chris and I looked back on the previous conditions of approval, and they were largely similar. Now, the reconfiguration of the site plan was not spelled out in the previous approval as clearly as the board, more in its current configuration, has spelled it out, but a lot of the concerns were very similar. So it's very difficult for staff to try and sway in a situation like this. We believe that it's more important for us to sort of try to make that checklist, as Board Member Carter is mentioning, try to make that as clear as possible, and it's really for the board to decide whether or not the project substantially meets with what you were hoping for and what your expectations were, having put in a lot of time and energy in considering the project. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
going back to the first time the case was heard, on the second time around, one of the board members was absent, and so this comment wasn't brought up until it was heard the second time around. So, I think that comment may have been added back then at that time, back in August of 2007, but at that point, nothing was really stated in as clear a fashion as December of 2007.
It sounds like in December, when you last heard the case, when Board 2 last heard the case, there were 13, 14 conditions. I think what you may want to do is just go down each of them, and in your mind, does the redesign of the project, in your opinion, does it comply or not comply with the intent of the previous conditions?
Okay, you guys want to do that?
I think I sort of did when we were going through it, but we can do it again.
Well, I just picked out a couple of them, because, they're not all, one of the staffers had made the comment that not all of these comments were created equal. I think that's true. I think we should really hone in on the ones that we think are the most important, and rather than counting, it's to me, the whole No.2 was really what it was all about. And that was really it. And I think that some of the specific comments about the trees and, things like that were really an attempt to help with that second comment, I think it was an attempt to help them, like, hey, maybe if, let's just be sure that, we're protecting what's there and that there's enough trees and all of that. But the issues all have always on this project revolved around the landscaping and looking at this. This is what it's all about, not the beautifully detailed building, because it is. It's a beautiful building. I want you guys to build some permutation of this, because I think it's such an upgrade for the neighborhood. I think that's what's so hard. It's like, I don't want this project to go away. I want you to build this project. But I also feel like, something is it's just too much building for this lot right now. It's just, these outdoor spaces are so small. And yes, they're beautifully landscaped. You hired a landscape architect, and there's a lot of stuff being crammed in. But at the end of the day, it's just not a lot of space.
I think it comes down to the fact that, as you look at the site plan, if you want it to be a similar mass and it doesn't go 3 stories, you're telling him to make, I do agree that you're going to almost lose a unit on it. So I think it's going to be very difficult to try to incorporate that space somewhere else. I think you could do what you're talking about if it had a 3rd floor. So, is that what we're saying? At that point, you're really telling him to go back and redesign. So.
We've seen projects, and when we have in that folder of projects we like, we've seen architects come in with really creative solutions with really challenging lots. We've seen people put gardens in places. We have a skyscraper going in that has gardens that pierce the building, in the middle. Mm-hmm. There are ways of thinking outside. Come on, you guys are the architects here. There are ways
but in this scale, even
in this scale, we have a project that's going in on San Fernando that's it's not low-income housing. I think it's some kind of specialized housing. There was Efren Olivares did a beautiful building.
It may come to me.
Yeah, we've seen buildings that have come in where people have really done interesting, creative things to add private space, to add landscape. In the 50s, they were putting gardens in the middle of foyers. There's all kinds of things that were done.
This is my issue that I was talking about, that if we are so persistent that this is what should happen, we should really work that way and make it clear that if this comes back anything close to what it was presented some months ago, it's not going to be approved. But we don't do that. But it comes back and kind of with the changes, most of them have been addressed, and then we say, but this one comment,
which is a huge comment,
is the only comment that you should really have done. That's the part that I'm having problem with. I don't disagree with you, by the way.
I think it's, what would have been really helpful, it's too bad that that I'm not psychic and didn't see into the future, because what I would have loved to have was the videotape of that last meeting, because we spent an hour then talking about site planning. So it's not like,
Yeah.
you know, it was not the case that we talked for 45 minutes about the horizontal railings in the front, and,
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
I wish you said on that, reconsider location of common area.
But that's,
Size of
look,
it, yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
because we did meet with the applicant several times and had knowledge of the previous meeting, staff believes we communicated the intent of that comment with the weight that, the necessary weight that you had given it in your last meeting.
I think the issue for me is, was it really discussed that the location was going to change?
It was discussed many
That
times.
the location would change?
It was discussed. Yeah, it's not a new issue.
and every one of these that we approve becomes a precedent, because then the next guy comes in and says, my building had the exact same footprint of that project, and you approved that.
No, I think we should, if something, to me, the process should be that if we really think that that's the comment that is going to make or break this project, we should, ahead of the time, before it comes to this board, say that just don't go there. I mean, that's my problem.
You left it so gray, you left it gray.
Yeah, if we leave it gray, then if I was in, the applicant's shoes, so to speak, I would have been somewhat confused, because I have come all the way and made it here to present this project, and all of a sudden, out of all those comments, this one comment, which should have been probably on top of the comments and be written twice as big.
Well, again, that clarity of your intent always helps when staff is trying to implement the board's concerns. But again, we believe staff was very clear on this point, and there was no confusion about that.
It's but somehow it made it back to this board.
Well, staff cannot prevent a project from moving forward, any project from moving forward. Staff gives our best advice as to what the board might say, what the board could say, what the board, and in this case, what the board had said, and did spend probably more time than the applicant would like, working together with them to try to achieve that goal.
Madam Chair, can we ask the applicant to comment on this? Or
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I was here last time, and I think we were really clear. I don't feel like we're springing anything new on them or anything like that.
No, that's not what I'm
Was the
saying.
direction that the location was going to change, that you had a problem with this location?
We talked about all of the we basically said, we would like you to try to redesign, as it says, the site plan, so that the space is not in the back like that, that there's more usable space in other parts of the building. And staff, please, if you somehow missed that and didn't talk to the applicant about that, let me know.
We did not miss that.
And and I feel like in general, that if you feel as an architect that you can't do something like that, it would really be helpful to come in and bring those studies and say, look what we tried, and it didn't work, because then I'd feel like the effort was made. But like you said, I looked at this, and I felt like they had given us the wrong set of plans, because it's the same plan we saw.
I've said that, and I don't disagree with you at all in terms of the direction that we all hope that the new buildings will take and bring new things to the city and make the neighborhoods better. And this issue that you're talking about is the problem that I've had with almost 95 or more percentage of housing units that go up in Glendale. And one of the reasons I've joined this board is because I didn't want to see the same thing, neighborhoods being kind of, I don't want to say too harshly, but I think the city can do better. But the problem that I'm having here is that we have to make sure that along the way we we work in a way that we enforce that idea in a much stronger way. Whether we have to go to the next level up and come up with guidelines that changes the way buildings should be designed and so on, or, you know?
That's entirely my point. I mean, it's obviously, there's other ways of doing this. There's one that comes to mind that's on Allen, between Walnut and the lake in Pasadena. It hits 3 stories. It has a roof garden off of an upper deck. It's very interesting. You know, that could have been this. I mean, I understand there's other ways you could do this, but I'm thinking, I think it's difficult to say without consideration from the city about different ways of doing the setback such that you could move it. But I think it's a hardship that you have the larger setback in back, and then in addition to that, you need to generate, 15 feet or 10 feet inside the building. I'm just saying, if that's important to the city, I wish they would do the guidelines such that it encourage that.
Yeah, we've been asking for that for a long, since I've been on the board.
It's difficult. I don't know. I don't think it's. I wasn't here for that. But I think it's difficult to. I think without the kind of guidelines or the backup through the ordinance to.
Yeah, I mean, I come to this, Mike, I think, like you, I'm sort of a victim of sort of a Patty Hearst syndrome in this, that I've seen so many of these that I think that children do play in the street. I think that's where they're supposed to play, that I didn't, it's hard to conceive of another design. When you 4 units on a 6,700 square foot lot, there's room for a ping pong table and goodbye, and maybe the mailman could get to the mailboxes. So then you come to a project like this, and where the A board has made a legitimate attempt to address that, but it hasn't been addressed. So,
well, no, my point is, there's other ways you could do this building. What I'm saying is to tell them to do it a different way. You're really telling them to completely redo it structurally.
We did.
Okay,
that was exactly what we talked about last time. We talked about all kinds of solutions, but then we said, let's not give them any one. Let's just make the general note that we feel that it needs to be redesigned, the site, and that's the whole, it says redesign the site plan. I mean, you can't be any clearer than that. And whether it needs to be 3 units, well, I don't know, maybe it does need to be 3 units. It's not that big of a lot. Now, that's not, I can't force them to do that. Maybe there's ways you can have your 4 units and, but I think we were really clear last time, and I just think this is the wrong way to go. And whether I feel bad or not, I'm less concerned with the developer. I'm more concerned with the people who have to live here and on the block. That's my primary concern, is sort of the neighborhood and what's going to happen. And I'm disappointed that when it came back, it didn't come back with any really substantial changes. If we only had wanted these minor changes, we could have approved it with those as,
conditions or
conditions and considerations. That's why we wanted to see it again. And just because we're a different board, I think doesn't mean that, I think we need to sort of look at that and say they didn't make the changes that we had asked for last time. Clearly, otherwise they could have just been conditions.
Right. Actually, if I can read into the record, I was looking at the August 23rd submission where the conditions were enumerated, all 13 of them. But then if you look at the Design Review Board record of December 6, 2007, there are 3 very brief and they're very clear. Address all the conditions from the previous DRB meeting, redesign the site plan and common area by making it more usable and accessible. That was a clear condition.
Well, I mean, when you read that is partially what they did, which is leveling it and get rid of the steps, which makes it more accessible.
Yeah. Okay.
There's other ways to do this project, and I'm not arguing that. There's plenty of other ways of doing it. I don't know. I think it's a gray area. You left them with a gray area.
Yeah, to me, this should have probably said redesign the building, allowing more common space possibility for each individual unit, by reducing the footprint of either individual units or reducing number of units going on this site.
Yeah, I feel it's not, I can't.
To say redesign the site.
Guys, it may not be worded all that well, but staff understood what we meant. They worked with them. So do you think that it wasn't clear what we were asking for?
It was clear, and in addition, I also wanted to mention that the zoning administrator signed on the first month of '06, so January 25th, '06, an interpretation regarding common open space that also speaks to this issue, and we can, I don't believe it's in the package. We can have copies right now and pass them to you.
Could you, okay. Would it be helpful to read that, do you think, or no?
It's fairly lengthy.
Okay. Well, whether or not you think this was worded well, I mean, that's why we have these meetings. That's why we actually speak to the people, because we had this conversation ad nauseum then. It was very clear, and, if you think that it wasn't clear, that they didn't understand what we were trying to get at here?
I believe that it was communicated clearly more than once.
So,
That the actual location of the
Yes.
common area would change.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I know that came up because they were resistant to the idea. That was that was a big issue. And part of the complaint towards us was that they had this previous approval and the,
I am here, I can talk here.
yeah.
Okay, come on back. I don't know what
As I
information.
mentioned earlier, I understood clearly the comment. She is right. They asked to relocate the common outdoor, but it's a comment that we can't respond. It's not doable. I have to lose 1 unit. 1 unit out of 4, it's a 1/4 of the project. It's a comment which is not doable. If we have to respond to that comment and to lose a 1 unit, I think that my client will decide not to do anything with this project. And I think we are not asking any variance, any favorism, whatever. We comply with the zoning code. It allows 4 units. We do provide the common outdoor space as is required by the zoning ordinance. We provide private outdoor space too. We do have 40 square feet, which is required by code to provide outdoor space. If they don't want to go to the common outdoor, they can stay in the private outdoor. But yeah, the answer is that it was very clear for me, the comment, what to do, but it's not doable. As you told, if they allow me to go to 3-story building, then half of my lot, I can make it common outdoor. And the other thing, economically should be, feasible. If I separate the 2 buildings, losing 1 unit there, it's totally a project that doesn't make sense on this property.
Is 3 stories allowed on that?
No, it is not.
Okay,
Madam
thank
Chair,
you
it's
very
not
much.
allowed.
Thank you.
So I think that, and this is where I would ask you guys as architects. Now, he has just, said that he understood that, these were our suggestions. But my question is, do you really think it's true that it can't be done? Because that I don't know.
It can't be done. That's my point. If you can't go 3 stories, you're limited to this allowable building area. That's your base sheet. That's
Stephanie?
your base.
I don't have a comment.
Okay.
I
No,
agree with you.
Disagreement from staff.
With these size units.
I started by looking at the setback that you cannot move the building to move the common area to a more central location. That was one thing. Then the next thing is to go up. So you're bound by these boundaries that you can't even encroach. So it's almost impossible to.
That's the brick you're given if you built right to the setbacks. And then you
Yeah.
divide it by 4, and you get something near 1,400 square feet if you have the units. I think if the units were 2,000 feet and you could reduce them, which gave you extra out of that log, the allowable log, I think it's possible. But I think if you have 2 stories and you make it a log, you divide it into 4, it gives you about 1,400 in that kind of range.
Well, having,
So-
I understand that there's financial constraints, but, it's not our fault that they want to have 4 units. I mean, having 3 units here is an option. I mean, I don't know, financially and all that, but, I mean, you're going from 1 unit to 4 units. There's no real reason except for their reason, they have their own personal reason, but it could be 3 units, and it'd be a much more livable building. And I just have to say that, just because they want to squeeze 4 units in here doesn't mean that we have to end up with a city that has no trees and, no place for people. I think it's the wrong way to go as a city.
I completely agree, but I think it's unfair
And
without...
that's their own burden. They put the financial burden is their own financial burden. That's not something that we should take into account.
But another thing to consider is I don't think it's in our sort of jurisdiction to say that you're allowed to build 4 units, but we won't let you. I don't know if we can do this or not.
It is in your jurisdiction.
So we can basically go against the zoning code and...
Sure.
It's a design.
Yeah, if it's design-based. Otherwise,
So what can stop us from saying, if you really want to make this site really work, 2 units will do it even better?
Well, if I may, I don't know that staff is hearing from the board in this case a desire to reduce the number of units. There is a desire to modify the location of the common open area to a more central location. Staff has seen projects like that come through our system. The setback does not limit them in that regard, the rear setback, because the rear setback is 5 feet on the ground floor. So, while yes, that requirement may require them to modify the sizes of the units, staff does not believe that in any way that requirement is essentially a veiled request for downzoning. In this case, we didn't hear that from you, we didn't reflect that in the comments, and we communicated the comment in regards to the desire for a common open space that would be usable by all 4 units.
The rear yard second floor setback is what?
8 and 11 average.
Rear yard setback?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, bottom line, I think there's a lot of solutions that could have been employed here that weren't, and I just don't think that enough effort was put in to looking at the site plan, and I'm just not, I can't support this as it is.
The one thing that I'd like to say is that obviously you were there, and as you say, there were a lot of discussions, and since I wasn't present, then that's the disconnect that I have with the proceedings before. But one thing I do believe, and that's the first thing I said, was that I didn't see a big difference in the old plans and the new plans, which was a bit surprising. So in that sense, yeah, I can't disagree that there's not a big difference, basically. I don't know what to say. It's a little bit of a tough situation to be for us, the new...
Well, apropos that, I'm always a big fan of supporting what the previous board, however it was constituted, and with staff, whatever their decision was. This motion by Bob Carnahan, second by Mr. Malikian, was approved 4-0. So it was a unanimous decision on December 7th, 2007, to return for redesign with those conditions. So that's history. That's us. Now it's ours. Now it's ours. Now we can't. I love to fob it off on a previous board, but it's now ours. So, but having said that, I do give great weight to Ms. Friedman, who was with that board, and brings us actual prima facie evidence of what their seeming intent was, and I have to believe you.
And that's what I'm saying.
And the only other thing I could suggest, and this is just, I'm just going to throw it out there, and I have a feeling you're all going to say no, but if you're really not comfortable, you do have the option of continuing it until Alan's here, to have the 5th person here who was also here the last time, who made the motion. So if you feel that will give you more evidence or more information, I meant more information,
sure,
then that's an option you have, too. Now staff has really got their head in their hands over there. Or if you want to, if somebody wants to float a motion, I think we have discussed this now.
Mike,
Yeah.
I'm going to turn to you because I do give weight to your thoughts, and I think you're thinking, these are 4 units, where's the ping pong table go, and it is a really tough thing. Do you believe in your heart of hearts that a redesign of the site could implement an outdoor area, landscaped area that would help this project?
I think you could. I have a difficult time without the city doing guidelines that explain very clearly what we're trying to do as a multifamily zone, that they have a vision, that the city agrees with,
Right.
that this is the vision for it. I have difficulty making somebody do a major revision off of something that's conforming and has people either like or don't like the rear yard common area. I might have a difference of opinion. I mean, the fact of it being in the center breaks the building up. Those units would be nicer. Absolutely, I completely agree. But I think it's difficult for me, without the city even saying something, for me to go that extra mile and say, you have to lose a unit. I don't know if I'm in the right position.
Necessarily say that either.
Well, I'm not, exactly, but I think one of the things that they've done is that there is kind of an interesting amount of setback on the entry side, where you have a walkway and there's sort of garden on both sides. So they've sort of pushed back a setback there, sort of increasing a setback, I think, which happens nicely. Listen, I'm not trying to push the project. I'm just saying it's difficult, and I think it's difficult for me to say, what I think is you're almost going to do a common area that has a 10 or 12-foot dimension to it, even if you push the units back to the rear yard setback, it's going to give you about an 8 or 10-foot zone width-wise at the center, which would be enough to put windows on those units, which again, I think would make those units nicer. But, what is the common area you're getting ultimately? It's maybe 10 feet wide. I mean, it's functional, it's a usable space.
One of the things that I just noticed, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
a 1,300 square foot unit, being a three-bedroom unit is probably, that might be part of the problem, because it's kind of too small to be, it's a small 3-bedroom unit, right? So it seems like almost like one of the bedrooms, it turns to a nice terrace. I mean, just as you were talking about possibilities, I think one of the problems might be that I think it probably has too many bedrooms for this size apartment or housing unit. If it's a two-bedroom unit, then it's a viable, nice kind of bedroom sizes and everything else. I mean, part of that common space could be a larger terrace at the second floor.
Could be.
If you have a 200
Gara, why don't you speak in the mic?
The zoning ordinance clearly requires common outdoor space. It doesn't say, because City of Burbank has a code, it says if you provide so much private, you can eliminate the common outdoor. In Glendale, we don't have that
Yeah,
code section, that it says, we do?
No, we don't.
We don't.
Yeah,
Do not.
thank
Even
you.
if I provide 200 nice private patio on each unit, still I have to provide that.
Yeah, and
common
we have talked to staff about the idea of allowing the smaller multifamily, not the big ones, but some of the smaller ones to use some of the, it hasn't happened yet. But yes, thank you. Yeah.
No, I wasn't referring to I was just referring to this issue of making this a better housing sort of building. The 4 units that will be better units. I think it's not only about the common space. It's about units that are, when someone walks in and feels like, wow, this is different, and this does something different, because those balconies kind of break the larger mass of the building down or terraces and provide better extensions into the common space of the larger building. But I just keep going back to the same thing that Board Member Kirkos just talked about, you know, we have requirements that we need to either enforce them in a way that it's clear from the beginning, not maybe halfway through, or even if it happens halfway through, we have to enforce it before it comes back at the same, as a similar kind of effort. I think before it, if some of these issues that are so important to a project are not met, then it's redundant to have it be reviewed. And I'm not saying that justifies the fact that we should approve it, but I'm just saying that if we really believe that this should have been redesigned, then it should have come in as a different project. It's come in at the same project.
Yeah, and at the staff level, we can't deny them
Yeah, you can stop
the hearing, the meeting before you.
Yeah.
We can work as much as we can to have them address your comments to the extent they want to, but at some point, they have a right to be heard by you.
And that's, as it should be, because sometimes, you know, we don't always agree with staff, too, and
Yeah.
it's good that people have their day in court, so to speak. My suggestion is, you know, every project that comes in front of us meets zoning code, or at least it should. I mean, sometimes things slip through, but they all meet zoning code. We're not about enforcing the zoning code. That's what staff's for. We're here to give it exactly this kind of review. And, yeah, you know, there are single-family, there are guidelines, but even if there weren't guidelines, we'd still be seeing single-family in the same way we're doing this.
Yeah.
And I think that this board was really clear with them last time. I think staff was really clear with them. I don't think that should be the issue. I don't think that we should be saying, well, maybe they didn't understand, or maybe they can't do it. If they can't do it, I would have loved to see that evidence. I mean, to come in with these plans and say, here, look, we tried this and it didn't work. Instead, I see essentially the exact same project, and I think it has the same issues. The financial issue, I sympathize. I mean, we work in the development business. You know, my husband's is a landscape architect. I know that there's constraints, and I have a lot of sympathy, but I can't sit up here and try to take the financial into account on projects that come in. All I can think about is the design, and I look at it and I say, did they do what we asked them last time? And is this the right kind of design for this area? And I just have to say, unfortunately, because I love the architecture of the building, unfortunately, I just feel like it's not there yet. I just, you know,
But, Mike, let me just ask you, because I think I see where you're going.
I don't have enough of a problem with it being in the back.
well, that's a different issue. That's a totally, if you think that this is that this
No,
is a good...
the idea of the public area in the back, I don't think is a
Then
problem.
that's fine. That's,
I really don't see that as a problem.
okay, that's
that's the
very
basic
fair.
thing.
No, that's very fair.
Because I think what happens is if you put it in the center of the house, and center of the structure, you can have the same issue with the fenestration. You can have windows that you'd want to have, you could gain from that new exterior. You're going to say, don't put windows on it because it's going to look into the common
Well, I
area.
wouldn't. That was never a comment.
Well, I'm just saying that from their standpoint, they're taking it off of the other one because you didn't want it to look on the common area. Then you put a common area in the center where you could have all these great windows for more light. And he's thinking, well, they told me to take the windows off, the open space. I can't have open space. So you're making me put this space in the center of the building, and you don't want me to have windows on it. So, I don't know. I personally don't have a problem with being in the back, so that's why I don't...
I think definitely is an option, but I think the only other way that I just thought about was that but the 5-foot setback in the first floor and then 8 to 11 for the second.
You need to have a 5-foot minimum, 8-foot average on the first floor. It's not just a flat 5 feet.
Okay. So
Is it
so
11
it's
foot?
much better than 17. Right now it's 17.
I'm sorry?
It's much less than 17 feet, which means that the building can definitely get closer to the back.
Yeah, absolutely can, yeah.
So I
I
think-
thought it was 15, I thought it was previously.
Probably half of this area can be accommodated in the walkway side of the thing. But at the end of the day, it will be a much bigger garden that you walk through to get to your house. But what happens is that the ability to have a large space that something can be done with it is lost. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can take half of this space and incorporate it into a much larger entry walkway garden.
But you lose the...
But you lose the ability to have some space that is big enough to put a ping pong.
Yeah.
That's.
I interrupted you, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, because, Mike, what I was going to ask you, and I thought you sort of were going there, is that if we say that, if there's a consensus here that redesign the site plan and common area, has this project fulfilled that condition? Now, I think what you would kind of come back and say, well, maybe it hasn't, but I don't know if you can, given the lack of city guidelines. Yes, there's a requirement for landscaping at 25%, but is there a requirement that it's really usable, or is 1,700 square feet on a project like this really usable, beyond my facetious ping pong reference? So if we said, if we supported the previous board and said that this project has actually not fulfilled that condition, then we send it for redesign, and once again, now it becomes our problem or our purview. But if what you're saying is, I don't know, are there 6 designs you could put down on the table and one of them would meet that, or are you sort of saying that this project does, in fact?
I think my main point, like I said, is I think, first of all, I don't have a problem with the public area being in the back, and I think it benefits by incorporating the required setback so that it's a larger space and more usable for kids to play in, as opposed to it being broken up on other parts of the lot. And so that's really my major issue. And I think I would be open to other options. I just don't know if
they're doable.
No, I think they're doable. They're probably doable. I'm just wondering if they're good enough to say, do this other option. If they're way about the same, I don't know how good I feel about saying, oh no, do this one, as opposed to something that weighs about the same.
My dilemma too, because I feel like we ask the applicant to go back, but what might come back is probably a different version of the same issue.
Yeah.
That's what because of lack of guidelines that can clearly say, if you do this is what the rest of the city will look like and will be developed in the same way. But if we just do this project, are we kind of guiding it in a way that can become a precedent, and hopefully somehow the rest of the city will be able to follow it? I don't know, because there are no, going back again, there are no guidelines that clearly says that a certain way should be followed.
The cities, when they do multifamily, there's City Gardens in Pasadena, the classic example. They say they want a main garden, and it should have these kind of characteristics, or that the garden should be placed in the center, and it should be partially visible from the street. They talk about what that space is. I don't have the kind of guidelines that say that it shouldn't be there, because I think it's incorporating the setback, which means it will be larger. Obviously, it would be nicer if it was 2 duplexes and it was kind of garden apartments. I think that would be nicer. But the net result of the open space would just be the space between the 2 gardens.
Well, I can just tell you that I've been on the board now for about 4 years, and we've been pretty consistent in terms of what we've been asking for from multifamily developers. And this developer, Domus, they've come before us many times. This isn't anything new. I don't think that we're being unfair or springing anything on anybody, or all of a sudden saying like, well, we have no guidelines, but now we want you to do this.
Okay, no,
I've been on this board now for 4 years, and I've seen a lot of the same people over and over again, and staff works with them and has been working, always works with the applicants. None of this is a surprise to anybody.
Okay, well, let me just ask you this. This is a very similar situation. You see these all the time, where you have a lot like this, and you're putting 4 or 5, maybe 6 units on a lot. Where is your preference for that common open space? Because, do you have a problem with it being in back? What is the characteristics of that being in back that's a problem?
I have lived in these buildings in Los Angeles, and I've visited many of these buildings in Los Angeles. And
so you'd rather have it where, though? I'm asking. I truly am asking.
Well,
what do you feel about that?
I feel like that maybe it's too many units on this lot. Honestly, that's what I feel. I feel that in Los Angeles, everyone should be able to walk out of their building and see some greenery, unless you live downtown. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that this is I don't think that we're so urban here, or that we want to be so urban, that we deny people the ability to look out of windows and see something green, whether they can afford a single-family house or want to live in a multifamily house. Now, of course, there's always going to be large buildings. People can choose to live in condos that are 20 stories tall, like the Glendale Gardens apartments that's coming in, or whatever it's called. What is it called? Verdugo Gardens. People will make those choices, but I think that here in this neighborhood with this kind of zoning, I don't think that the intent here is to do that sort of urban streetscape. I really don't. I think that the intent of this kind of zoning, and the reason that it's limited to 2 stories, is that they're not going for that kind of really serious kind of urban streetscape. I think that the idea is still that we have trees and we have greenery and we have some yard and garden type things for people to live in. I think that's what the zoning here is looking for, and I just don't think that this, even though they're trying to squeeze a lot of plants into the space that they have, and they do have this area in the back, I just think that we can do a little better. I think this is a big building on a small lot with not a lot of places for kids to run around in. That's all. And I just think if everything follows suit, we're going to have a place where, I just think it's a quality of life issue at the end of the day for the people who end up living here. They have a beautiful building, beautifully designed building. It's going to be beautiful to look at, beautiful to live in, I'm sure. But as soon as you go, it's just not taking advantage of the outdoors. I just think, we could ask for, we have the luxury here of having design review, and, of demanding more, kind of, and, I sympathize too, and I hate that people walk out of here without an approval. I really do. I want them to get their building approved. I'm sure they hate us, and it hurts me that they hate us. But I also feel that for the people who are going to live here, for the kids who are going to live here, that I just wish that we still had some of that utopian 1950s, garden apartment philosophy left in us.
But I think the city should downzone it. The city should downzone it.
As I said before, I don't disagree with you at all. I think we have to improve our process of moving these kind of projects in a direction that's more desirable and more effective. That's what I'm saying. But there's no question that 3 units on this lot will be the better thing to do. There's no question.
That's obvious.
And as staff has said, we can make those kinds of recommendations. And we have done that. Let me just say also, though, we have done that in the past. That there are definitely times where this board has said to people,
too much.
well, we don't say you have to reduce it, but we just give them we return it for redesign, and we say we recommend you look into the possibility of doing this. We have done that, and let's not forget that staff's been working with them. And so it's not like all of a sudden staff has said this is all great and we're blindsiding them either. So
The board has also on occasion requested that applicants bring in their various studies which resulted in their final submittal.
And as a point of clarification, Mr. Baxter has pointed out to me that each unit in the code has a minimum size. These particular unit sizes surpass the minimum size in the code. So even if you did ask for the building to be somewhat reduced in order to get larger open space, larger than is required by code, I don't believe that you're asking for a reduction in the number of units, which is it's dramatically different than asking for a larger common open and more usable, more centrally located common open space. Those are 2 very different things.
now, if you believe that, that the open space is fine the way it is, that's a fair argument, and, I don't agree, but I think that's a fair argument. But I don't think it's fair to sort of make a decision based on thinking that we've blindsided someone.
No, I don't.
Or that we're asking them to do something that...
My problem, like I said,
Force it even more. That's what I'm
Okay.
Yeah,
all right, sorry.
I just wish it was...
Throughout the whole process, not that we kind of be soft. No, I'm not saying that by any means that the staff has, you made it very clear that you have a number of times you have talked about it, but I think there must be a way to abort this kind of thing.
The way you do it is you have it in the ordinance, and it's not in the ordinance. That's the problem. It should say, on this size lot, it should only be 3 units. Why are you telling them that you could do 4? If it's only two-story.
Like she said, it could be smaller units, and then maybe they can do it.
I mean,
But also, sometimes people could reconfigure things. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of doing things. People do all kinds of, like you said, the rooftop garden, I mean...
That's three-story, though.
There's...
Three-story. That's the problem. But see, maybe they allow three-story.
It's possible to do
Right,
three.
it should. I mean, they don't allow it, but I'm saying that should be allowed.
But you could even put a rooftop garden on a two-story building, right?
Only could sometimes.
problem
I'm
is
just
that-
saying, I don't know, but...
Sit on the floor, right?
The problem is, to get to the second-story rooftop garden, you need some structure to get up there.
Which would be
Okay,
the
well,
third
whatever.
story.
I don't, I'm not saying they need to do a rooftop garden. I'm just saying that there are sometimes more creative solutions to these
I
things.
completely agree. I just think that the city ought to determine that. The city ought to say this is a 3-unit lot, because the city has determined that that's the open space.
It has to be something that tells, in order to improve our situation citywide, we need something more concrete and in
Yeah,
place.
the city said this is the amount of open space.
Clear enough.
The city should
This
say-
is the way it is.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
The city, I have complete support for the city saying
Yeah.
it should have more open space on this lot. But I think the city should say that. It should be in there. So, I don't have any problem with them doing that. I have a problem saying, listen, that's what the city has determined as open space. And you're saying double the open space or make it more, I don't know. I have a problem, personally I have a problem.
I'm not sure if it's even a question of the amount of the open space, because I think this amount of open space is fine. I think it's just where it's placed
Where it's
I
placed.
find problematic, because to me, these areas just usually end up being a place where maybe the rear unit uses, but not so much other people. It's just not readily accessible. And also, a lot of times they're very dark, they're kind of back with the big buildings. Now sometimes they become places where people store things, they put their bicycles or their, these people don't look at it, they don't look out on it. So I don't think it's the amount of open space. I think it's that's why we made the comment. We didn't make the comment to add more open space. The comment we made was to reconsider the site planning to have better utilized space. Now, if you disagree, if you think that it's, that it's fine the way it is, that's fine, and, you can certainly vote to support it. That's your option, but I just think, I was looking for something different when I came back. I was sorry I didn't get it.
Somebody make a motion, whatever that motion
I know. I told my husband I would be home by 6, so.
Well, my colleague mentioned the 3-bedroom situation. The applicant, I want, fully within his rights, he wants the most amount of units, 4 units, he wants the most amount of bedrooms, so maybe as a board, we could actually insist on, or not insist, but encourage what the board had required as a condition. I feel that they haven't been shy in asking for everything they want, and so if the board...
Motion.
Yeah, so I'll make it...
We can do it. That's something we've grappled with. We've always gone back and forth with sort of saying well, maybe we should just make it ask them to do this or that and the other thing. It's not, we've kind of come around lately to the thinking more that we should just make what we're looking for known and let them come up with the solution, whether it's making the bedroom smaller or making, that's why we have these discussions and they're here and they can hear it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Just before, because I'm going to make a motion, on your checklist, can you concede all the other points, have all the other, because I'm fixating on the redesign, condition number 2 dating from December 6th. That's what my motion's going to be framed around. Will the board concede the other, some 10 or 12?
I still think they should think about the wood siding, and, I don't know,
Okay, so then we should visit some of those.
I think some of these were taken
conditions.
care of. I think that staff will, can easily go through them and sort of strike the ones out that they feel that, where the conditions were met.
Is that something, Stephanie, you could do?
Yeah, absolutely. We can carry over the ones that haven't been satisfied and leave out the ones that have been substantially satisfied. As you make your motion, just some information.
Yes.
At this point,
Does this go to City Council? No?
Well, no, it was submitted under the previous ordinance, so that's an important piece of information for you. However, if you do vote to for a return for redesign or for a denial, either one of those can be appealed at this point to the City Council. And because this has been returned for redesign now twice in its current form, that's over and above how many times it went to the board in 2006. The board may want to consider sending a stronger message with a different motion. So those are items for the board to consider. In any case, a return for redesign or in the case of a denial, the applicant has the right to resubmit. If they want to resubmit the same project, they could do so as a new application.
If they do that, does it have to go back to this board, or is there a
It always has to go back to this board within 2 years. That's a provision within our ordinance.
Laura, I would just ask you, I'm prepared to do a motion for redesign, but do you think that's, you've been on the board longer than any of us here, I think. So do you think that's an appropriate, would that get, I mean, there's no knowing, but I'm just asking you a gut.
I don't know. I've always been sort of confused over when it's better to return for redesign and when it's better to deny. I mean, there's a lot of things about this building I really like, so I don't want them to think that, I think that the architecture of the building, the actual detailing and all of that is very, very nice.
Okay, then I've made up my mind, because for me, this is the first time submittal,
Yeah,
so I'm going to take it under that.
In any case, the applicant can return to this board with a different design, and I was just corrected, any appeal, because this is under the old code, would go to the alternative assessment panel first, before any appeal to council would be possible. Thank
All right,
you.
I'm prepared to make a motion. I would move that DRB case number 2 PDR 2007-087 Baker be returned for redesign with condition number 2 from December 6, 2007, still applicable, and any conditions that staff determines have not been met from Section 1 of the DRB conditions. Would that?
That's a very nicely worded motion. I think that's very clear. Okay.
Yes.
Do we have a second? Yes. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I just want to make one amendment on that. It's actually C, not B.
It's not, it's C, because it's a...
On the face of your staff.
Oh, right, because it's not from that session, it's from our session.
Yes, sir.
C. So that's 2 PDR 2007-087 Charlie is the case number.
Okay, do we have a second? No second? Well, I'll pass the gavel, and I'll second it.
So we have a motion to return for redesign with conditions to include number 2 and any condition that staff deems was not met from condition number 1 of the comments from the December 7, 2007 meeting that the board reviewed.
Yes.
Okay, so roll call. Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Friedman, you have to vote because you're still, so it'll be Ms. Friedman. You're not going to be, somebody's
Yes.
going to be the chair, so Friedman. Mr. Who was the chair here?
I was the chair.
No, didn't you?
Oh,
Well, you
he
got
was. I passed it
Pass the
to...
gavel.
Okay, so
passed it
then
that way.
Mr. Garrigus
No.
and Mr. Zarifnian.
No.
Okay, so that's 2 no's, so we have to do a new motion and a second.
Michael, do you have a motion?
Or we could continue it until next time, so we have somebody else to break the tie.
I think that's probably appropriate, because unless the city determines that it needs more open space, I think it's unfair to ask for.
Okay, that's
I just-
certainly
that's how I
fair.
feel.
So I think we're going to end up with another two. So does somebody want to make a motion to continue it till next time, till Alan's here, and we can re-vote?
Make a motion that we,
Well, I just want to make it, we've done this in the past, and we've not opened, when we've continued it, we have continued from the point we are at. What I would suggest is that we have staff get the tape of this to Alan. We don't reopen it to the public. We just basically pick up where we left off. That's what we've done in the past, when we've had this happen more than once. So if that's...
is that okay?
Okay, so we need someone to make the motion then?
I think Mike was...
No, go ahead.
No, I passed the gamut.
Oh, back to me? Okay.
Make a motion, we continue this where we left off, to PDR 2, is it 2007-87-C? Is that right?
Excuse me, we have to make an admission that none of us here on staff has administered that particular motion to keep the hearing open, but if the chair has experience with that, we will, in fact, rely on the chair's experience. Thank
Yeah, we
you.
did this before.
We've continued the case, and then you just picked up on the hearing, but we didn't word it as such that the hearing has remained open, you're just continuing.
Oh, yeah, that's all we're doing. But all I'm saying is that we're not going to allow the public to comment again. In other words, we're going to act as though, we're going to show Alan the tape so that it's like he was here, so that he'll be caught up to speed. He doesn't have to hear the testimony again. He'll hear everything that everybody said, and that way he can then vote, and we can also think and maybe change our minds or whatever. So, we'll just take another vote at that point.
And you want to probably move to a date certain.
Yes, we can move to, is everyone going to be here next time?
Next time is, when is the date?
Actually, next time is July 3rd, and that meeting is canceled,
So are we skipping a week or skipping 2 weeks?
skipping 2 weeks.
So then the next time will be,
17th.
Yeah, I'll be here.
okay, 17th of July. All right? So does somebody want to make
That's
a
my
motion
motion.
to continue?
He had made
Okay.
that motion.
We have a motion, we have a second?
To the 7th of July.
Second.
Poor Alan.
Who made the motion?
Submitted.
I think I know Alan's
You seconded
position.
And then we have a second by Mrs. Griffin.
Is there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and that is to continue the discussion to July 17th.
Right, so we're leaving it open. We're not closing the case, right? That way we don't have to, okay?
The continuance, I guess, in a sense. I have not heard, Madam Chair, I have not heard that language, but it is continuing, so the case is open, but I haven't heard that language.
Yeah, we had a case that was very contentious where we had like 50 people come and speak, and we did it that way so that they didn't, so they knew they weren't going to come back to give all that testimony over again, just for the one person who wasn't here. That's why I remember. That's how we did it. Okay?
We should move to continue. Do we need to?
Yeah, I think we need to vote.
We need to vote on it?
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys, so we have a continuance, we have a motion by Mr. Garrigus, a second by Mr. Zarifian. Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Garrigus?
Yes.
Mr. Zarifian?
Yes.
And Ms. Friedman?
Yes.
4-0 to continue.
Wait, we're all in agreement.
Until July.
For kicking it down the road.
They're kicking the can down the road.
Okay, so with that, then if there's no more new business, we are adjourned. Anything else, Roger?
Actually, no, we had
Thank you.
we had on the agenda July 5th minutes.
you.
Oh,
They
okay.
weren't included in your packet, they're not ready, so next time.
So we'll see you then in a month.
Correct?
Okay,
True.
we're adjourned.